In this series of videos, we'll talk about our third general approach to multiple regression analysis, sequential multiple regression, or returning to our the good, the bad, and the ugly analogy, the Eli Wallach approach. Now, by ugly, I don't mean bad. This is a good type of ugly. In fact, if you have a theory or idea of how your predictor variables are related to each other, this is probably the best approach to use. It's just ugly in the sense that it's more work and more complicated than a simultaneous multiple regression. In sequential multiple regression, variables are added to a regression model in a series of steps, but rather than being data-driven, they're entered in a specific order based on a theoretical causal ordering. This often reflects the temporal ordering of variables or their underlying constructs based on what occurred first, then second, and then third, etc., entered in that order. And because the effect of a variable will be its effect controlling for all of the other variables entered before it in prior steps, different orders will change the effects of different variables. If you order the variables one way and I order them a different way, we'll draw different conclusions about the effects of individual predictor variables. Ordering is everything. So before we begin with an example of sequential multiple regression, let's review a few concepts and terms that are important in the context of how variables are ordered in a sequential multiple regression model. Now remember, simultaneous multiple regression essentially operates on a model in which all of the predictors are correlated with each other and all the predictors predict the outcome. But that's about it. But what if you think that mother's education isn't just correlated with school quality? What if you think it has an effect on school quality? Maybe more educated moms live in neighborhoods with better schools. Then it's not just that mom's education and school quality are correlated. Mom's education has an effect on school quality, seen here in this one-headed arrow. Similarly, what if you think mom's education isn't just correlated with study hours, but instead has an effect on study hours? Maybe more educated mothers encourage or require more studying by their children. And of course, there's lots of research showing that mom's education has an effect on student grades. Similarly, rather than just being correlated, what if you believe higher quality schools require or inspire more studying by students? Then school quality and study hours aren't just correlated. School quality would be having an effect on study hours. And I think we all assume that school quality also has an effect on grades. And also that I think we can all assume that studying has an effect on grades as well. Based on all of that, this is the model that your theory or hypotheses would be based on. Your analysis should test that model, not just a bunch of correlated predictors, right? Now, it's kind of exciting, isn't it? So let's take a look at ways to measure and describe all of these different types of relationships inherent in this type of a model. Let's start with indirect effects. That's the effect that one variable has on the outcome due to its effect on another predictor variable. We may talk about that other in-between variable as a mediator. A variable has an effect on a mediator, which then has an effect on the outcome. For example, we see an indirect effect here in these two yellow paths together. It's the effect that school quality has on grades through its effect through study hours. Higher school quality leads to more studying, a mediator in this instance, and more studying then leads to higher grades. Both of these things together make the indirect effect that school quality has on grades through study hours. You can think of it as part of the effect of school quality that passes through study hours. Because it's a combination of two paths, the indirect effect needs to be calculated. Now, some advanced software will do that for you, but later we'll learn how to do it ourselves by hand. It's not too hard in multiple regression models. Now, when designing models for a sequential multiple regression, you must think of things like indirect effects. That's what it's all about. If you're interested in these types of indirect effects, if you're interested in mediators, then this is what you want, right? Now, then there are also what are called direct effects. Direct effects reflect the unique effect that a predictor has on the outcome that's unrelated to all of the other variables in our model. It's the effect that a variable has controlling for all of the other variables in the model. For example, this red path reflects the direct effect of school quality on grades. The direct effect, again, that red path, is what's measured by the unstandardized regression coefficient and the standardized regression coefficient, our beta. And while we typically don't talk about these sorts of paths in terms of variance, from an effect perspective, it may help to remember that the direct effect is also essentially reflected in the squared semi-partial correlation. Remember, our unstandardized regression coefficient B, our standardized beta, and the squared semi-partial all describe that unique effect that a variable has controlling for all of the other variables in the model. They're just doing it in different ways, talking about raw units, or talking about it in standard deviations, or talking about it in terms of variance. Now, together, the direct and indirect effects for a variable equal its total effect. They literally sum to the total effect of that variable. In sequential multiple regression, a variable's total effect is seen in the unstandardized regression coefficient, or the beta, and the change in R squared, in the specific step in which that variable is added to the model. So it's after we've controlled for all the earlier variables, but before any later variables are added. Now, to understand exactly what the total effect is, it's important to distinguish the variable's total effect on the outcome versus a variable's simple correlation with the outcome. They're not the same thing. The correlation reflects the overall association between a predictor and the outcome, including any spurious effects due to preceding variables. Think back to when we discussed the correlation between ice cream sales and drowning deaths, right? Ice cream doesn't cause drowning. It's that association is a spurious correlation due to ice cream sales and drowning deaths both being influenced by temperature, right? In this case, our model says that mother's education influences both school quality and grades. Therefore, the correlation between school quality and grades includes any spurious effect that's due to mother's education being a common cause of both of those variables. Now, that's actually a pretty straightforward spurious effect, but it can get more complicated than that. For example, you can have a spurious effect where a common cause has an indirect effect on the outcome. For example, the effect that mother's education has on grades through increasing study hours. This type of spurious effect would also be part of the correlation between school quality and grades. In contrast, the total effect controls for any earlier variables or common causes. In this case, the total effect for school quality only includes its direct and its indirect effect controlling for mother's education. The simple correlation includes any spurious effects due to common causes. The total effects has statistically removed the impact of common causes and their spurious effects. An analogy would be to think of the correlation as gross income, while the total effect is the net income after paying taxes. The total effect is what's left over after giving the earlier common causes their due, their rightful credit for their effect. So let's wrap up this video at this point. In our next video, we'll start analyzing that model using sequential multiple regression. Okay? Bye for now.